Have you ever seriously pissed off your in-laws? A few years ago, I started investigating my wife's family history, specifically whether my wife's great-grandfather actually committed a perfect crime. And my in-laws, well, they're not exactly thrilled about it.
If you come out with a piece that says he was a murderer, then I will be sorry that we ever said we would contribute.
So, why am I doing this? Well, the woman who was murdered, she was my wife's great-grandmother. And I think she might be haunting the house I grew up in.
I woke up because my bed was shaking. Shake, 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 shake.
Things also happened to me in that house. Things I couldn't explain. But I didn't take any of it seriously until I learned about the others who lived there after me.
You now have 3 completely unconnected families who have had some sort of inexplicable experience on the top floor of that house.
Look, I know how this sounds, but I think this all might be more than just a bizarre coincidence, because the ghost is a faceless woman, and it just so happens that my apparently haunted house is right next door to where my wife's great-grandmother was killed by 2 gunshots to the face. Her murder was blamed on her brother, but I'm not so sure.
Obviously the question was, did Vader do it? Kill them both.
And so, here I am, trying to figure out, did my wife's great-grandfather get away with murder? Is her great-grandmother haunting my teenage bedroom? And while I'm at it, did I end up marrying into a family because a ghost wants me to solve a case that everyone has got wrong for nearly 100 years?
You are deconstructing an age-old story.
We're going to be more traumatized by this podcast than we were about the murder, I'll tell you that.
There is going to be blowback.
I'm Tristan Redman, and from Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios, this is Ghost Story, a show about the things that come back to haunt us. Follow Ghost Story wherever you get your podcasts. Episodes out October 23rd. Wondery Plus subscribers can binge all episodes of Ghost Story ad-free. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. I want to tell you a story. Well, it's really 3 stories, all wrapped around each other. It's a ghost story, it's a murder mystery, and it's a family drama. By which I mean, it's about my wife's family, her family's history, and there's a chance they'll disown me for doing this.
If you come out with a piece that says he was a murderer, then I will be sorry that we ever said we would contribute to it.
But before we get into any of that, let's start at the beginning, with the thing that set all of this in motion. When I was 16 back in the 90s, my family moved to an old Victorian house in London on a street called Queen's Road. I slept in a bedroom tucked into the creaky top floor, and weird things would happen up there. I'd wake up and objects would have moved across the room, specifically this one vase. When I go to bed, it'd be on the mantelpiece, and then in the morning, I'd find it on the desk. I'd put it back, and the next morning I'd find it somewhere else. Lights would flash on and off on their own, and I'd get this uncomfortable cold feeling whenever I was alone in the house. It freaked me out at the time, but the truth is, I didn't really think much of it. I was a teenager. I had other things on my mind. Every now and then, I'd ask my sister if she was messing with me, but she always swore she wasn't. I grew up, left home, and became a journalist for Al Jazeera. I cover things like French labor strikes and the war in Ukraine. I don't believe in ghosts. So when my family moved out of the house on Queen's Road, I completely forgot about the weird stuff that happened in there. Until that is, a few years ago, a man reached out, an old neighbor of ours, with a story about that very room.
I mean, it's quite a story.
His name is Charles Pinellis, and he knows everything about this neighborhood. You could say he's a bit of a gossip, but you probably shouldn't.
Slanderous. Gives completely the wrong impression.
Anyway, this is what he told me. Charles was walking around my old neighborhood one day, going door to door, collecting donations for the local museum.
I was there rattling a tin.
And definitely not gossiping.
Well, I mean, it was just so-and-so's still there and so-and-so's moved out and they've had a divorce and all that sort of business.
Eventually, he gets to my old house and knocks on the door. A woman answers. She's the mother of the house. After chatting for a bit, she invites him inside and she tells him a story unlike anything he's ever heard before.
The story goes the American swans up with a hello and...
Here's what she tells him. One day, the woman is at home at my old house. She looks out of the window and she sees a man standing on the driveway.
So the mother of the house opens the door.
It's someone who used to live in the house, an American man who'd lived there with his wife and 2 children. The American says to her, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just have to know.
Do you still have that ghost in the top bedroom? Straight, like that."
What the American man proceeds to tell her, the things his family experienced on the top floor, it makes her go completely white. Because this isn't the first time she's heard of something going on up there. She just never believed it before.
This struck a chord since the daughter had always insisted that there was a ghost in her bedroom, which would manifest itself on occasions and sit on her bed.
The woman's daughter, starting when she was around 10, began complaining about a ghost visiting her room at night, specifically the ghost of a faceless woman.
She said to me, "Oh yes, my daughter told me about some goings-on, some sort of faceless woman who comes and sits on my bed." And she said, "I always batted them away on the basis that we don't believe in that sort of thing. So I rang your father, and he said that was Tristram's room. So I imagine he phoned you and the cat was out of the bag."
I promise you, and I hope you believe me, that I don't normally find myself having conversations like this, or even entertaining these sorts of ideas. But it's kind of weird, right?
You now have 3 completely unconnected families who have had some sort of strange, inexplicable experience on the top floor of that house. I think it's wonderful.
It was definitely intriguing, but it probably wouldn't have been anything more than a story I'd tell my friends in the pub. Except I couldn't stop thinking about this faceless woman. And that's because there's another coincidence, something I hadn't thought about in years.
So I guess Tristan and I had just started going out, and they invited my parents round to his house to come and say hi.
I first learned about it when my wife, Kate, and I had just started dating about 20 years ago. My family still lived in the house on Queen's Road, the one with the supposed ghost. And Kate was staying with us.
And my granddad was in London, so they invited him over too.
She was very close to her grandfather, so my folks asked if he'd join us.
So granddad arrived. He's got nice rosy cheeks, granddad, like all the men in my family. He wore a beret every day to keep his bald head warm. And then my granddad walked into the house, and before he said anything else, he said, "My mother was murdered in the house next door." And I don't think we had ever put 2 and 2 together between where Tris lived and this big murder that happened in the family.
To be clear, I'd never heard about this murder before. In fact, Kate didn't know a lot about it either. Just that her great-grandmother had been killed decades before. She had no idea that it happened here. Neither of us had any clue at the time that my new girlfriend's family had any connection to this neighborhood, let alone the house next door. But the details of the murder make the coincidence even stranger. Because just next door to my house, the house supposedly haunted by a faceless woman, Kate's great-grandmother was killed by 2 gunshots to the face. From Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios, this is Ghost Story. I'm Tristan Redman. Episode 1, The House Next Door. We've now come to the murder story. But before I tell it, I want to tell you a bit about my wife's family, the Danceys, because the murder didn't happen in my family. It happened in theirs. And the Danceys are a pretty impressive bunch. I'm going to take you through a tiny family tree. I'll start with the bald guy in the beret, or a beret to you Americans. He's my wife's grandfather. He was the one who announced that his mother had been murdered in the house next door. He was a well-known headmaster of elite private schools in England, including the one Kate Middleton went to. Then there's his son, my father-in-law, Jonathan Dancy, who's also bald and wears a beret. He's a pretty famous philosopher.
What if lying is ethical in this situation? What if certain actions aren't universally good or bad, like Jonathan Dancy says?
So much so that he's name-dropped in an episode of The Good Place.
Jonathan Dancy? Are you talking about moral particularism? We never even covered that.
And then there's his son, Hugh Dancy, my brother-in-law.
First positions, please. Roll the camera.
That's him in the latest Downton Abbey movie.
And action! Coming down the stairs, not expecting to find him there, waiting for you.
Hugh is Hollywood famous. He's not bald, and frankly, he doesn't look great in a beret. He's been in a bunch of movies and TV shows. Black Hawk Down, Hannibal, and my personal favourite, obviously, Ella Enchanted.
You're the first maiden I've met who hasn't swooned at the sight of me.
Then maybe I've done you some good.
And then there's my wife, Kate. We met at university. These days, she works for the United Nations. Before that, she was a diplomat. And as if she couldn't be more impressive, she literally used to save children for Save the Children.
Let's go straight to the expert on the UN, Kate Redman. Kate, what can you tell us about the decision?
So I work at UNESCO, which is one of the UN agencies. It works on education.
I'm not a Dancy, but I'm also pretty bald these days. And when I married Kate, the Danceys gave me a beret of my own so I could fit in. When you first meet the Danceys, they can be a bit intimidating, but they're also warm and funny. And after 20 years of hanging around them, they've become my family too. But in all that time, I hardly ever heard anyone talk about the murder. It wasn't a secret, but aside from that lunch with Kate's grandfather, it just never really came up in conversation. Until I started asking questions about it. What story did your dad tell you when you were 18?
That his mother had been murdered.
Not until you were 18?
Mm.
This is my father-in-law. I call him Johnny. He's the Good Place philosopher. He seems to be the only family member who was told about the murder on purpose, so he has the closest to the official version of it.
He was driving me back from Oxford. I must have been an undergraduate there. And we were just going over the Ridgeway. And he just started telling me this story. Perhaps he started off by saying something like, I was younger than you when my mother died, and your grandmother didn't die a natural death. But I should tell you how it happened.
The woman who was killed was Johnny's grandmother and my wife's great-grandmother, named Naomi Dancy. The year was 1937, and Naomi was a pioneering doctor in London. She and her husband lived in their house on Queen's Road, just next door to where I grew up.
So my grandmother's brother was living in the house, Morris. He was sort of disturbed because he had been damaged in the war.
Naomi's brother Morris was struggling with shell shock after World War I. He'd come home with a piece of shrapnel in his brain, having lost an eye. I don't know where this detail originated from, but it would later be reported that Naomi had particularly beautiful eyes. And as Morris lost sight in his own, he developed a deep jealousy of them.
Anyhow, one night, Naomi was in bed, she'd gone to bed early, And Morris came into the room and shot her in both eyes. And then he went into the upstairs loo and cut his throat. That's the story, really. Yeah, that's the story.
This is why, when I learned about the faceless woman in my childhood bedroom, I thought about Naomi. I wanted to know more about her and what happened that night. Who was Naomi?
Well, that is a very good question. I know nothing.
I didn't even know her name until you started working on this.
Did you know anything else about her?
Nope.
Except no one seems to know much about her.
I mean, as far as the family goes, there is nothing.
Is it Naomi? Am I saying the name right?
And in fact, as the story has been passed down through the generations, it's become less about Naomi and more about the man who survived to tell the tale.
The critical narrative part was Feather jumped off the stairs, like to dodge a bullet or something like this.
Because there was someone else in the house that night. Naomi's husband, John Dancy, my wife's great-grandfather, known in the family as Feather.
The way I've always told it was that Feather not only switched off the lights, but also flung himself backwards down the stairs.
The name Feather is a sort of play on the word father. Father, Feather. Anyway, the story goes that the brother Morris tried to kill Feather that night too, but Feather dodged the bullet and narrowly escaped.
It was an action story.
Great granddad had done like a really cool James Bond, jumping over the banisters, shooting out the light, like one of those roles that commandos do, and then shot the guy.
What are you doing with your hands?
I'm doing the guns, like.
Well, like a gunslinger. All details of Naomi have fallen away, and what remains is admiration for Feather and his daring escape.
Does that make him a hero?
Yes.
And this makes some sense. Feather has sort of an outsized influence on the family. They say it was Feather who established an obsession with education that the Dancys retain to this day. Even outside of the family, his presence is larger than life. There's a BBC documentary about the guy. His portrait once hung in the Royal Academy of Arts. He's the family patriarch. And one of the reasons we're calling him Feather here is that there are so many John Dancys in this family. There's one with his name in every generation. Which brings us to the third story, the family drama. Because just 2 days after I heard from my old neighbor about the ghost in my teenage bedroom, my wife discovered something that totally called into question this heroic image of Feather and the family's story of the murder. Can you remember the story of how you ended up finding that article? Was it like a sort of Google wormhole you were basically in?
I go down so many Google wormholes, yeah.
Kate's helping her dad with an obituary for her grandfather, the one that was headmaster at Cape Middleton School. She's poking around online to see what's out there, and she remembers him telling us about his mother's murder in the house next door.
And I looked up something like Dancy, murder, Richmond, not expecting really to find anything. And I did. I came across this crazy article on the National Archives website, and I had no idea why it was there.
It was written by an archivist who happened to stumble upon the file from Naomi's murder. Apparently, most murder files are kept in one building in London in the National Archives. And out of thousands of cases, this murder stood out to her. She found the police files so strange that she decided to write about it. She gives the broad strokes of the murder story, but then she raises some serious questions about what happened that night.
So I think it says murder-suicide or double murder, ? It was mind-blowing for me because the article questioned who was the guilty party and suggested that potentially it was my great-granddad and not the brother. And that was the first I'd considered the idea or even read any suggestion that the case was not sort of closed and clean and that the right guilty party had been found.
Kate forwards the article to her family to see if this could be true, and none of them had heard anything like it before. It was hard to tell how seriously to take the article, but at the very least we now realise that there was a different version of the story floating around, and it was totally unlike the official Dancy family story.
I mean, obviously the question was, did Fayther do it? Kill them both.
Kate's family decides this blog post is no big deal, nothing to take seriously, better to just keep moving and let it be. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I did some reporting, went back to the source, and got my hands on the original police file.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go.
Do it. And because I'm no murder detective, I called one up to help me understand it. Really anxious to hear what you make of all this, Jackie.
Oh, I find the story fascinating. The hairs stood on the back of my neck when I read it.
And once I started reading it, my little curiosity project took on much bigger proportions.
So cute here.
On an autumn day in 2022, my producer colleague Annie Brown and I are standing outside a little cottage in a quaint village in Surrey, waiting to meet a retired senior police officer from Scotland Yard. We've got the police file in your bag.
Yeah. Good morning!
Hello, Jackie. Jackie Moulton spent nearly 30 years in the job and became one of the only female detective chief inspectors at a time when men dominated these jobs. There's a hit TV show in the UK that's based on her called Prime Suspect. Helen Mirren plays Jackie.
I was a career detective. That's all I ever wanted to be, was a detective. We dealt with murders, rapes, domestic violence. I was a hostage negotiator, fraud cases, the whole gambit of crime.
After my wife Kate found that article raising questions about who might have actually killed Naomi, I wanted to have an expert walk us through the original police file to help us understand it.
Okay, can you explain to me what you're looking at?
So in front of me, I have the file relating to the murder that was in the National Archives. Well, it's the record of the crime and what happened. It's a storybook, really. The narrative of the criminal incident witnessed from different points of view. In this case, we have the most important statement from John Dancy.
By the way, I should say that in my wife's family, there are a lot of people called John Dancy.
So what do we call him, Dr. Dancy?
We call him in what he's called in the family, which is Fayther.
Oh, I can't say that. I can't say that because there's no evidence.
Sure. But if you don't mind, I'll call him Fayther just because it's so confusing for people listening to the story. But if I'm not consistent, but from you, it's totally fine. We're going to spend much more time with Jackie and Fayther's statement later. But for now, I want to walk through the night of the murder from Fayther's point of view. His account is the most detailed version of what happened that night, as told to the cops directly after the murder.
So this is a statement of John Horace Dancy, aged 46, a medical practitioner, who saith, "I am a medical practitioner and at the moment semi-retired. My wife, Naomi Dancy, was Assistant Medical Officer of Health at Hammersmith, where she has worked for 16 years. We had 3 children."
The statement's rather long, so we'll just be reading parts of it right now. In these first opening sentences, Fayther is outlining the main characters in the story. We've got Fayther himself, his wife Naomi Dancy, and her brother, Maurice Tribe.
Maurice Tribe, aged 44, an army officer, pensioned with severe head wounds and with loss of an eye, was my brother-in-law.
Remember, Maurice Tribe came back from World War I with a piece of shrapnel lodged in his brain, having lost an eye. Fayther tells us that Maurice's mental health has been deteriorating. He's been drinking more and more, and he's staying with the Dancys on Queen's Road so they can look after him. And now, Let's pick up with the night of the murder. Faither's statement starts the clock at around midnight. Naomi Dancy had arrived home late from a lecture she was giving across town. Faither tells us what happens next.
I sent my wife to bed and went and peeled an orange for her and told her to go to sleep as she was tired, and I would write to the children and get it off tonight. Then I went to my study on the first floor and started to type letters to the children.
Just after midnight, with Naomi in bed, Faither settles in to write to his 3 kids at boarding school, sending them updates from home. Morris is also still awake.
I could hear Morris, who was in the next room, moving about. I left my door a little ajar so that I could hear what he was doing.
Faither is listening for Morris's movements because he says he's already nervous about what Morris is capable of. He explained earlier in the statement that Morris has recently been threatening Naomi, even specifically threatening to shoot her eyes out.
About 1:10 a.m., I gauged the time because I rang the ambulance up 20 minutes afterwards. I heard him go to the lavatory and lock the door, and shortly afterwards I heard shots. I thought it was 3. I went to the door and saw Morris advancing towards me. I said, "Morris, what have you done?" He was advancing towards me with the revolver in his hand pointed at my head. I tried to reason with him, but he kept coming towards me, saying nothing. I pretended to lean against the door, and I realized he meant to shoot me. I switched the light out and dropped flat to the floor. He shot as I fell, and the bullet whizzed by my ear and went through the back window. I laid quite still and pretended that I was hit. He then went into the lavatory and closed the door behind him.
So, Faither is lying on the floor of the landing pretending to be injured. His wife, Naomi, is in their bedroom to his right. And his brother-in-law, Morris, has just disappeared into the lavatory off the landing.
I went to the lavatory door and tried to force it. I found it was locked from inside, and I called on him to come out and give me the gun. He said, "Stand away from those panels, or I'll shoot you like a dog."
I should warn you, the last section of his statement gets pretty graphic.
I then went into the bedroom. I saw my wife in bed. She had been shot through both eyes and blood was spurting from one of her eyes. Eventually, after a struggle, I forced the door of the lavatory with my shoulder. I found Morris in a somewhat sitting position with his head bent forward. A razor fell from his hand as I pushed the door open. I felt for his pulse and found him pulseless. I left him and went into the bedroom to look at my wife. After a lapse of a few minutes, I telephoned the ambulance and later the police. Signed, John Dancy. At 9:30 a.m. on the 23rd of November, 1937.
The story of the murder was picked up by newspapers all over the world, from Tennessee to Dublin, Wisconsin to Liverpool. There was something about it that seemed to grip people, maybe because women doctors were so rare in the first place, or the gruesome specifics of the crime. The headlines read, "Envied his sister's eyes, so killed her," or "Brilliant woman doctor shot dead." But it was also Faither's escape that fascinated readers. Nearly every article included a dramatic first-hand account of his standoff with Morris and the gory cinematic details that Faither shared with the press. But the statement is just the first document in the police report.
And the more that you read, the more questions that you have to ask yourself. And I would have done this investigation a lot differently.
As Jackie, Annie and I make our way through the file, we get to a point in the story that the archivist noted in her blog post.
At this point, some anonymous letters had started to come in.
The final documents in the file are 2 anonymous letters sent to the police by members of the public in the aftermath of the murder. They're barely legible, but both letters urge the cops to look into the husband. One says, quote, "Believe me, I am not the only person over here who thinks he murdered his wife and brother-in-law himself." So if you get one of these letters, what are you thinking?
Well, I wouldn't have investigated it like it's been investigated in the first place, but if I received anonymous letters, that would give me a nagging doubt that I had missed something. And what the police do in this is just minimise it and ignore it. I mean, it can all be true. Let's face it, it can all be true. But these are the unanswered questions.
Okay, at this point, here's where I am. There's a ghost in my teenage bedroom, a faceless woman. Somehow, I've married a woman whose ancestors just happened to live in the house next door, and one of them had her eyes shot out. And now it seems like there's a suspect in her family that no one has ever looked into. And let me throw in one more wrench. That bedroom, the one with the faceless woman in the moving vase, it's where my wife and I first got together.
It was actually in this house in Richmond. That was when we sort of might have realised that there was something maybe more than just being flatmates.
Remember, Kate and I met at university, and the first few years we were really just friends. Even though we shared an apartment, nothing ever happened between us. But then the summer before our final year, Kate came to visit me at my parents' house on Queen's Road.
In Tristan's bedroom. I'm sure his parents will be delighted to hear that that's where we actually got together concretely. I'm too British to say it any other way. So.
The night that we got together concretely was a big turning point for us. We went from being friends to dating to married 5 years later. Maybe it was random. Maybe it was fate. But could it have been some sort of paranormal intervention? Listen, I don't actually believe Kate's great-grandmother was there in the room with us that night, manipulating us for her own purposes. I'm not totally nuts. But has the thought crossed my mind since I started this project? Yes. Yes, it has.
Think you're going to come across as like the wacko ghost believer?
In the family?
Yeah.
I hope not. I realise that at best, opening up a 90-year-old murder case involving your family, Katie, and wondering if there's any link between the murder and a ghost in my teenage bedroom is totally ridiculous. And at worst, it's a very bad idea as a son-in-law to be doing this.
I mean, it is totally wacko.
But is it a terrible idea?
In many ways, yes.
But here are the questions I need to answer, right? Did your great-grandfather get away with murder? Is your great-grandmother the faceless woman haunting my teenage bedroom? And while we're at it, did we end up married because this ghost wants me to solve a murder that everyone's been getting wrong for a century?
I mean, it sounds like so far-fetched, but it's like you've kind of opened many doors and you've kind of got to work out where they're going to go.
You don't have to be diplomatic. Do I have your blessing to pursue this story?
Oh yeah, you do. You do have my blessing. And then at the same time, I sort of have this sort of strange gut reaction that's like, God, I hope this is done the right way. Shit.
This season on Ghost Story.
Everything has possibility, doesn't it? In murder.
My dad would never have killed my mom. He loved her.
There's a legal term for phrases like that. This is all bullshit.
What is the actual evidence?
I feel deeply disturbed by that experience.
Yeah. We're going to be more traumatized by this podcast than we were about the murder, I'll tell you that.
You are deconstructing an age-old story that a family has told itself.
You're not going to get to the truth.
There is going to be blowback.
Follow Ghost Story on the Wondery app, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at wondery.com/survey. Ghost Story is a production of Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios. It's hosted by me, Tristan Redman. Our lead producer is Annie Brown, and senior producers are Chloe Prasinos and Jess Hackle. Our producers are Zandra Ellen and Emerald O'Brien, and our associate producer is Natalie Peart. Our editor is Joe Lovell, with fact-checking by Maximo Anderson. The theme song and music by Daryl Griffith, supplied by APM Music. There's mixing and original music by Hannes Brown. Pineapple's head of sound and engineering is Raj Makija, with assistant engineers Sharon Bardales and Jade Brooks. The senior audio engineer for Ghost Story is Davey Sumner, and the senior producer of development for the show is Jess Hackle. The artwork is by Brian Kluge. Legal services for Pineapple Street by Rachel Strom and Sam Kate Gumpert from Davis Wright Tremaine, David Hurst from 5RB, and Crystal Tupia at Odyssey. The senior producer for Wondery is Michelle Martin, with producers Brian Taylor White and Grant Rutter. The managing producer for Wondery is Rachel Sibley, and the coordinating producer is Sarah Mathis. Our executive producers at Pineapple Street are Maddie Sprung-Kaiser, Max Linsky, and Jenna Weiss-Berman. Our executive producers for Wondery are Morgan Jones, Rich Knight, Marshall Louis, and Jessica Radburn. Special thanks to Jonah Hull, Ed and Chloe Caesar, Alison Vermeulen, Jonathan Oates, Eleanor Johnson Ward, Barney Lee, and Chris, Jan, Sophie, and Justine Redman. This episode contains public sector information licensed under the Open Government License version 3.0. Wondery Plus subscribers can binge all episodes of Ghost Story ad-free. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. This episode contains descriptions of violence and suicide. Please take care while listening.
Okay. Today's a pretty big day.
Yeah, we're going to meet our first one of the Americans, which is really exciting, and I'm feeling quite nervous actually right now. It's a rainy autumn afternoon in London, and Annie and I are standing outside a studio waiting for someone to show up. Someone who used to live in my childhood home on Queen's Road.
What are you nervous about?
Well, I've spent so long thinking about this family and never really expecting I was going to be able to meet anyone from this family. But this is the first time that I'll have a person who slept on that top floor in front of me where I'm able to ask what it is that they experience. Here's what we know about the ghost of my childhood home. At least 3 families have independently experienced something they can't explain on the top floor, and they don't know each other. First, there's me. There was a vase that would seem to move around my room inexplicably, and lights that would flicker on and off. The second family, the Americans who moved in after us, we don't know what they saw. And the third saw a faceless woman, which is why I've got this crazy idea that it might be connected to the murder of my wife's great-grandmother in the house next door. Getting people who lived in the house to talk about the ghost, though, was proving harder than I expected. I reached out to everyone I could, got a lot of rejections. The message I got was that something had happened to them in there. They just didn't want to talk about it. I don't believe in ghosts, but it's been so difficult to get hold of these people. Some of them recoil from it, some of them just don't want to get involved, some of them are quite frightened. that has built up a kind of tantalizing expectation around what it is that's actually in the room. I had to know what the hell had happened in there. Finally, one woman decided to talk to me, and she was on her way to meet us. You know, it may be disappointing. It may be totally unlike anything I experienced, and I may walk away from this thinking, oh, is that it? But I'm quite excited to be able to ask the question. From Wandering in Pineapple Street Studios, this is Ghost Story. I'm Tristan Redman. Episode 2, The Witness.
I do wonder if you would introduce yourself to us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, my name's Sonia, and I moved to London in 2006 because my family was living already in the Richmond house.
How old were you when you moved into that house?
I was 20.
Okay, so that was 2006.
That was just after you moved out?
That was just after my family moved out.
Yeah.
Sonia's a member of the second family who had some sort of experience in the house. And it was her dad who walked up to the house a few years ago and asked the question that started this whole thing off. Is there still a ghost in the top bedroom? Though Sonia didn't actually sleep in my bedroom.
I guess I could have chosen your room, but I think I chose the left-sided one.
Is it smaller?
It's smaller.
So why did you choose it?
I don't know. I guess it felt warmer to me. That other one felt a bit kind of dark and cold feeling.
What does that top floor look like? What can you remember about it?
I just remember coming up the top of the stairs and it's a bit creaky carpet. And then my room was the left one, wooden slatted floors and the ceiling kind of slanted. And then the room you had was to the right. I never went in there much. No one was in your room, so I just had the top floor to myself. And when we had people to stay, they would stay in your room. And quite often, they would come down the stairs to breakfast in the morning and they would say, there's a weird, uncomfortable feeling up at the top of the stairs there. They would comment on that quite often when we had different people to stay. And that I now know is a feeling of haunted places. Because if we're talking about ghosts experiences, I was a skeptic until living in that house.
Can you tell us the story of the first time you sensed that?
My experience, my actual experience, yeah. So I went to bed as normal, no problem. And I remember waking up at must have been 2 or 3 in the morning because the window had blown open. I shut it again, thinking it was odd because it had never done that before and there wasn't that much wind. So I shut it and then went back to bed. But then it must have been another hour or I don't know how long. I woke up because my bed was shaking. But not just shaking like even shaking. It was shaking like vigorously and then slower and then faster again. Like shake, 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 like that. To the point where I actually thought, is this house so old? Are my parents below me having sex? And it's like making the bed shake this vigorously. But then, within about 5 seconds, my right leg had extended outside the covers and was pushing against an invisible force, almost like trying to get someone off of me. And it happened without me. My leg was just out of the covers, pushing against it. And then I laid there thinking I'm too scared to run to the door. So I curled up in a ball and turned over. And within, 5 minutes, the bed started shaking again. And I couldn't make sense of what was going on. It was just as if someone was on the edge of it, pushing the wood base. And then I freaked out again because it was as if someone is in the bed next to you, it creates an impression in the bed. So that's what happened. It was an impression in the bed next to me. And I was starting to roll into it, and I was freaking out. So I turned the other way towards the wall, curled up, and then I was too afraid to put my hand there to feel what I felt would have been a dip in the bed. So I just stayed there, closed my eyes, and then the impression left. And then I got the sense like I was being watched for about 5 minutes, where you just feel like there's a presence in the room with you, observing you.
I'm quite shaken by all that.
I could see in your face. Yeah, I've sort of like, I laugh about it now. Yeah, I don't remember it feeling, it was scary at the time, but if it was that scary, I would never have been able to go sleep in my room again. So I don't know how I did that at the time, but...
Did you just not believe it to be true? Or
no, I definitely believed it. I know for a fact, like, no one would be able to tell me that that was a dream or I woke up and I was in a dream state. It was definitely 100%. And then in the morning, I went down and I spoke to my mum and I was like, Mum, can you just be honest with me? Like, did you and Dad have sex last night? And she goes, no, Sonia. Like, they hadn't, for a while. So they're like, no. And I said, well, this is what happened to me. So I think then we were just kind of like dumbfounded and shocked.
Sonia wasn't the only person in her house to have experienced something like this. She said her sister did too. How long after this episode that you experienced did your sister sense something in that house?
I think she'd had a few little things, but there was another incident where my mum went up to my sister's room and she was screaming because her TV kept changing channel on its own. And she tried to change it back and then it changed again. It was almost felt malevolent and her bed started shaking. And so she was so freaked out that she had to sleep in my mum and dad's room at the foot of the bed.
And while Sonia never had another bed shaking event, her sisters didn't stop.
I think her bed would shake quite regularly, just this constant shaking. I think she had that quite on as a regular nightly thing.
I spent months trying to speak to Sonia's sister, but was never able to convince her to go on the record. At first, she seemed interested in talking. We went back and forth through a mutual friend for a few weeks, but then the communication died. She closed up. The message I got was that what she experienced in that house deeply upset her. She didn't want to revisit it.
Well, I'm just desperate to know what you experienced. That's like, I'm like really wanting to find out what you experienced.
I was a bit nervous to tell Sonia about my experience in the house. Compared to the bed rattling, my little yellow vase moving across the room felt a bit feeble.
Did anything else happen to you? Or is it just mostly those things?
No, and what I experienced in that room was nothing threatening, malevolent. It was just this feeling that there was something a bit odd that was happening that I couldn't explain. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I am now, right?
So do you feel like you're still kind of trying to look for a rational explanation, or are you open now that it's something paranormal?
I don't have any answers yet.
Okay.
I really don't. And I'm just trying to understand. But, if you have several different people, none of whom know each other.
Yeah.
All of whom have been sleeping in the same place.
Yeah.
And all of whom are independently reporting similar sorts of things.
Yeah.
It's quite discombobulating.
Yeah. It just opens up this extra fascination about who is it and why were they moving stuff around and who used to live there. I don't know. It's all that stuff.
Right now, I'm bursting to tell Sonia about what happened in the house next door. But because it seemed her sister was still traumatized by whatever happened there, I felt uncomfortable bringing up a disturbing murder. Though in my mind, I'm thinking, if this is the ghost of my wife's great-grandmother, why would she be shaking Sonia's bed? What's she trying to tell her?
From Wondery, I Hear Fear is a new anthology series of suspenseful stories hosted by Carey Mulligan. These stories are inspired by true events in real places, so the next sound you hear could be your own scream. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to hear a preview of I Hear Fear.
I'm going to put the ghost story on ice for a second and pick up with the murder story where we left off in episode 1. Remember, my wife's great-grandmother was murdered back in 1937. Her name was Naomi Dancy. The official story is that she was shot through the eyes in the middle of the night by her shell-shocked brother Morris, who was also found dead on the scene with his throat slit. Morris also tried to kill Naomi's husband, a man that the family calls Fayther, but Fayther valiantly escaped and called the police. When I got hold of the original police file, though, something curious stood out. 2 anonymous letters, nearly illegible, that questioned whether the brother was the true culprit and urged the cops to instead look into the husband. It seems the police barely did, and no one in my wife's family believed that he had anything to do with it. So that's what we're going to do. Look into Fayther, and we just so happen to have the perfect resource at our disposal. That is, a nearly 3,000-page document he wrote about himself.
These are the memoirs. There are 18 volumes of closely written hand.
The document lives in the home of Mark Dancy, my uncle-in-law.
Don't really know which volume to start with.
And it's made up of 18 notebooks, Fayther's handwritten memoirs that tell the story of his life. It's a huge amount of work.
It's huge. It's extraordinary. And, this is before the days of word processors, of course.
I've come to see Mark and the memoirs because together they become the source of what people remember about Fayther. Have you now read all of them?
Probably most of them, yes.
And they live here because Mark has a unique connection to Fayther. In many ways, he's the closest you can get to being in the room with him. Mark looks like Fayther, tall with that bald, Dancy head. He's a doctor like Fayther. And Mark is so proud of the man that he even took on the name for himself.
Am I right in thinking that your grandchildren call you Fayther?
Yeah, I thought it's quite a nice sounding name, and I thought that his memory should be preserved because he was a truly remarkable person. Actually, just to read a page of his memoirs, you will realise.
It's true. When you're done marvelling at the scope of the memoirs and actually start reading them, it's clear that Fayther is easy to revere.
The stuff about his own life is fascinating.
In the memoirs, Fayther lays out his life story. He was born at the turn of the 20th century and excelled at school from a young age. He gets a scholarship to Cambridge University.
He was a sort of educational sponge, and he thirsted for knowledge.
Now for something really wonderful, and for this I need another beautiful girl.
While training to be a doctor, he becomes a skilled magician and joins the Magic Circle.
You stand right here, I want to show you a wonderful trick.
It's a famous London club for magicians.
That's it. Hold it. Hold it.
To pay his way through university, Fayther starts writing pop songs under a pseudonym. And later, he gets a #1 hit in America.
Number 1, the top tune of the week. The song the survey finds in first place.
And it's still cruising down the river. Cruising down the river on a
a Sunday.
Which, by the way, is covered by Frank Sinatra. What's this one?
This is Gallipoli. This is a special box.
In World War I, Feyther joins the army and lands on the beach at Gallipoli, a famous Allied defeat.
These are my memories of the 1914 war, written in 1965.
His memoirs of the First World War are so vast and detailed that the BBC makes a documentary based on them.
Discovered among the papers of an English GP, Dr. Jack Dancy, is a remarkable account of his career.
Portrait once hung in the Royal Academy of Arts in London. And he does all of this before the age of 28.
One always wondered if one's life was rather dull compared to his.
As far as Naomi goes, we don't learn very much about her in Feyther's memoirs. He does describe when they first fall in love in 1918. They're working alongside each other at the hospital and they have a run-in in the library. Her sandwich falls on the ground and they both bend down to clean it up. He's taken with her blushing cheeks and beautiful eyes. But for all the dramatic escapades Feyther writes about, he doesn't write about what's arguably the most dramatic night of his life, the night Naomi was murdered. The memoirs end years before. And Mark is worried that in the life of this great man, that's the thing I'm going to focus on at the expense of everything else.
The sort of most spectacular, from a reporting point of view, spectacular part of his life was Naomi's murder. You know, it'd be easy to see how a sort of sensationalist journalist makes a big story out of that. And it would be easy for someone who hasn't got an open mind to say, well, I'm going to set out to show that Feyther did it, or lead the listener into that belief. And I don't wish his memory to be stained unnecessarily. And I don't think he deserves that.
At the time, Mark's caution felt fair enough. Feyther was his grandfather after all. He's protective of him. But the more I thought about it, the more something felt a little funny. Why does Mark think it would be easy for me to portray Feyther as a murderer?
Okay, there were a few questions, but they were never answered in a negative way for his memory, shall we say.
Those questions Mark's referring to, I want to try to answer them myself. And to do that, we're going to return to the police file, to the only first-hand account of what happened that night.
I'm about to play a clip from I Hear Fear. Follow I Hear Fear on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Shh. Stay quiet. Don't move. Did you hear that? Sounds you hear in the middle of the night. Or when you're deep in the woods. Or alone, walking down a dark street. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. But what if it's not? From Amazon Music and Wondery, I'm Carey Mulligan, and this is I Hear Fear, a new anthology series that will make you bolt your doors and hide under the covers. My favorite thing in the world is a brilliant ghost story. And nothing scares me more than a story inspired by real events and real horrors. From a deadly dance party to a cursed movie set. The sounds of terror are all around us. Warning, the next sounds you hear might be your own screams.
Binge all episodes of I Hear Fear ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
We're going to dive back into the police file from Naomi's murder, but we're not going to do it alone.
My name is Hugh Dancy. I live in New York. I'm an actor. I'm 47 years old.
I am your brother-in-law. My brother-in-law, Hugh, may not be a murder detective himself, but he does sort of play one on TV.
I got an acquittal for a stone-cold killer. That was the day I realized I would much rather send bad people to prison than help them get off.
Hugh is the Hollywood famous Dancy. These days he plays the assistant district attorney on Law & Order. But really, I'm turning to Hugh for this because he's kind of the person I go to for advice in the family. He's my wife's big brother and someone I generally look up to. When you looked at Feather's statement, what did you make of it?
Well, I made the mistake of reading it immediately before I went to bed last night. It was not a good plan.
So while I was waiting to finish my reporting before sharing information with the wider family, I wanted to send Hugh the police file early on.
I've read it twice. I read it again today. Bunch more things jumped out at me after second reading, and I found it to be quite disturbing and rife with details that begged questions.
He also agreed to lend his acting talent to this project.
So I'm playing my great-grandfather.
You're going to play your great-grandfather.
Yeah. Okay.
Hugh's going to read from Feather's police statement from the night Naomi died. Last episode, we read the end of the statement, but that's just a small fraction of what Feather told detectives at the time. His entire statement takes up 5 typed pages, and in it he outlines everything that happened in the days leading up to the murder, and why he thinks Morris killed Naomi and then took his own life.
Statement of John Horace Dancy, age 46, who saith, I am a medical practitioner, and at the moment semi-retired. My wife, Naomi Dancy, was assistant...
You know the cast of characters. There's Feather himself, Naomi, and Naomi's brother, Morris Tribe.
Morris Tribe has always been a heavy drinker since his youth. Lately, he has been losing the sight of his remaining eye, and Mrs. Dancy, my wife, and I thought we must keep him.
So, we've established Morris came back from World War I having lost an eye. Here, Feather's saying he recently started to lose sight in his other eye, so he's been treating him for it.
Under directions from a specialist, I have been giving him injections every Monday for the past 6 Mondays for his eye.
The fact that Feather gives Morris these injections every Monday will become significant, because the murder takes place overnight on a Monday. And at this point in the statement, Feather sets the clock back 10 days before the murder.
On Friday, 10 days ago, he drank very heavily. On Saturday morning, after this, he rang me up and threatened to shoot my wife's eyes out. He has, on previous occasions, rang my wife up and threatened the same thing.
This is an incredibly damning moment in Feather's story. Morris has threatened to kill Naomi in the precise way that she's about to be killed. If what he's saying is true, it's basically case closed.
I was very upset, and I rushed off in the car to fetch her from Hammersmith and to know that she was safe.
Just stop there. There is a problem.
You remember Jackie Moulton. She's the retired Scotland Yard detective we spoke to in episode 1. When we read through Feather's statement with her, she couldn't help herself. She stopped us periodically to point out discrepancies and doubts she had about Feather's story.
So we cannot corroborate the story that Dancy is telling, that Morris Tribe has previously threatened to shoot his sister through the eyes. There's no corroboration of that.
In his statement, Feather actually does refer to another person who heard Morris making threats. He says Morris's sister-in-law also heard them, but when the police interview the sister-in-law, she tells a different story. She says about Morris, quote, so far as I know, he never threatened anyone. And later she adds, nobody had any idea that he would harm anyone.
Got a huge gap there, haven't you?
Well, there's a specific contradiction, isn't there?
Specific, yeah.
Where are we?
All right, back to Feather's statement.
At 7 a.m., he rang me up. He was weeping drunk.
Feather says that in the week before the murder, Morris just has a terrible time. He's getting drunk at 7 in the morning. He gets hit by a car. he injures his legs badly. He can hardly walk. And at this point, we arrive on the day of the murder, Monday, November 22nd. Because it's a Monday, Morris is supposed to have his injection. So Fayther goes and picks Morris up and brings him to Queen's Road for the night. When they arrive at the house, Fayther has to drop Morris off before immediately turning around and taking his housekeeper home, a woman called Mrs. Brooks.
We got home at 3:30 p.m. I put Morris into his room on the first floor and put him into 2 armchairs as his legs were bad. I took Mrs. Brooks in the car to Brentford. On the way, I remembered there were insurance papers in the house which we did not wish Morris to see. He was all alone in the house.
Insurance papers that he doesn't want his brother-in-law to see.
He was all alone in the house. I left Mrs. Brooks and came home. I came in silently and I saw him sheepishly shutting his door.
What he's worried about Morris seeing is the paperwork from a new insurance policy that Fayther has just taken out days before on Naomi's life. This looks really bad, right? But the way Fayther explains it to detectives, this new policy doesn't in any way implicate him. Instead, he turns it on its head, and he says it's actually Morris's motive for killing his sister. Hold on to your hats, folks. I'm about to go deep on life insurance.
About 15 years ago, Morris took my wife to an insurance company, had her examined and insured.
So this is Fayther's take on the insurance situation. He says that years ago, Morris brokered an insurance policy on Naomi's life. Morris is a kind of amateur agent, so he got a small commission for doing this, like a finder's fee, every year. And even though Fayther never asked Morris to broker a policy, that's been their life insurance coverage for years on Naomi.
The final payment is due this week. Morris knew this as he was drawing commission on the policy.
But now that policy is expiring, which is why Fayther took out a new policy on Naomi's life. Except this time, he doesn't use Morris as the broker. So Morris is about to lose his yearly commission. And because Morris wasn't bringing a lot of money in, that small commission may have been a big part of his income. Fayther knows this. He knows it's going to upset Morris, so he's been trying to hide it from him. But on the night of the murder, Morris happens upon the paperwork.
I came in silently and I saw him sheepishly shutting his door.
Soon after, Naomi gets home and Morris confronts her.
After my wife came home from business, he waited till I was out of the room and said to her, "I hear you are being reinsured." I heard this through the door and went back. I made signs to her to say no. She said, "Has Jack been telling you?" meaning me. I chimed in and said, but nothing has been settled, Morris." He looked at me and then at her and said, "Well, if that's the case, you need not expect to live to draw the money." I said, "Don't be ridiculous, Morris. No one lives to draw their own insurance money." He said, "Anyhow, you can go your own way if you left me out of it, but I think you are mean." My wife said, "You know, Morris, if you had it, you'd only drink it."
But where's the evidence to support that? Where is the evidence to support that? Now, the only way that we know that this is true, according to Dr. Dancy, is that Dr. Dancy conveniently sees Tribe leaving his office where he had left the insurance policies. Hey ho! He knew because he'd been snooping around my house.
Fayther lays out the insurance as Morris's motive. That Morris was so upset to lose his yearly commission that he killed his sister. But Fayther doesn't point out 3 important facts. 1, that at the time of the murder, both policies are in effect. Morris's policy, which was about to expire, and Fayther's new policy. 2, that Fayther is the beneficiary on both of them, which means 3, upon Naomi's death, Fayther stood to gain £6,500, equivalent to $450,000 in today's money.
Any investigation where there's an insurance policy, red flags, red flags, red flags.
Back to the night of the murder, Fayther tells us that Naomi and Morris have just finished arguing about the insurance.
I sent my wife to bed and went and peeled an orange for her and told her to go to sleep as she was tired, and I would write to the children and get it off tonight.
You know what happens next. What follows is the back and forth between Fayther and Morris that we heard last episode, but I think you'll hear it differently this time. At about 1:10 a.m., Fayther says he hears Morris leave his room, and then he hears gunshots.
I went to the door and saw Morris advancing towards me. I said, "Morris, what have you done?"
Fayther and Morris are both standing on the landing, in between Fayther's study and Naomi's bedroom. Fayther sees Morris pointing the revolver at his head, so in a split second, Fayther does that stealth maneuver thing to escape being killed. He switches off the lights, plunging the landing into darkness.
I switched the light out and dropped flat to the floor. He shot as I fell, and the bullet whizzed by my ear and went through the back window. I laid quite still and pretended that I was hit.
He's pretending to be injured and listens closely for what Morris does next.
He then went into the lavatory and closed the door behind him. I went to the lavatory door and tried to force it. I found it was locked from inside, and I called on him to come out and give me the gun. He said, "Stand away from those panels or I'll shoot you like a dog."
After facing off with Morris through the lavatory door, Fayther goes to check on Naomi in the bedroom next door.
She had been shot through both eyes, and blood was spurting from one of her eyes.
Eventually, after seeing that Naomi was dead, Fayther goes back to the locked bathroom door and breaks it down with his shoulder. He finds Morris sitting cross-legged with his head bent over.
A razor fell from his hand as I pushed the door open. The revolver was on the floor by his right-hand side. I felt for his pulse and found him pulseless. I pulled his head back and found that he had a severe gash in his throat. The lavatory was saturated with blood, and he had blood on his right hand.
So, can I stop there? So,
one final point here from Jackie. Jackie noticed something in the police file, a discrepancy between how Fayther found Morris and how the police found Morris.
This point that I just want to raise now was not in his original statement, but it comes from the chief constable.
When the police get to the scene, they find Morris dead with the razor clasped in his hand. Of course, Fayther has just described a very different scenario.
A razor fell from his hand as I pushed the door open.
Now, this is obviously a contradiction to what the police officer sees. So immediately the police officer will say, well, hang on a minute. You said that you saw it fall to the floor. I saw it in his hand. How did it get into his hand? And at this point, Dancy says, well, actually, I put the razor back into his hand.
Do they say why?
They didn't ask why from anything that I can see on the file.
Then the police noticed something else weird. Morris Tribe's hands were suspiciously clean. He had very little blood on them, despite having just cut his throat. So the cops go to Fayther and ask him something like, do you have any idea why Morris's hands would be so clean? And Fayther gives an explanation.
He says he took the pulse of his brother-in-law to see that he was dead. And in order to take his pulse, he washes his hands. He washes Tribe's hands to do that.
He washes the blood off the dead man's hands?
Yes.
How do you understand that?
I don't know. I don't know why he would do that. You wouldn't touch the evidence. Why would you touch the evidence? Why would you touch it?
I left him and went into the bedroom to look at my wife. After a lapse of a few minutes, I telephoned the ambulance, and later the police. Signed, John Dancy. At 9:30 a.m. on the 23rd of November, 1937.
Let me recap what Jackie has just laid out here in her analysis of Feyther's statement. First, the threats he tells us about, where Morris threatens to shoot Naomi's eyes out, are uncorroborated. No one else heard Morris threatening anyone. Second, the motive Feyther ascribes to Morris, that he was so upset to lose his insurance commission, is also unsubstantiated. In fact, the whole insurance thing looks much worse for Feyther than for Morris, because he's the only person who would benefit financially from Naomi's death. And finally, Feyther messes with the crime scene in some strange, specific ways. He tells police that when he finds Morris in the bathroom, he washes the blood off of Morris's hands and places the razor blade back into them.
The allegations in this case are all made by Dr. John Dancy. And it seems that this esteemed physician's word is taken by the police as the gospel truth. Well, you never do that.
There's one other thing, a glaring absence in the police investigation that Jackie finds egregious.
Sometimes we have to talk about what's missing from a police file. And what's missing from a police file is the dynamics of their relationship between Dancy and his wife, Naomi. We know nothing because there's nothing in the file. There's no statements from anyone to say what the state of their marriage was. Had she spoken to anybody, the statements might say they were absolutely phenomenally happy.
Yeah, and we have no evidence to suggest that they're not happy.
No evidence to suggest, but that's what I'm saying to you, Tristan. So you can't make assumptions if you haven't asked the questions. That's really dangerous territory to go down.
All I knew about their relationship before I started this project was that it was very unusual for 1937. Naomi was a much more successful doctor than Feyther, so she was the breadwinner while he stayed at home with the kids. But you don't learn any of that from the police file.
It's interesting that there's no statements about Naomi at all.
Nothing. No statements about Naomi.
She's almost not mentioned.
Exactly. She has no voice in this. The fact that she's dead, that's all we know about Naomi. She's been shot in the eyes.
Despite all of her suspicions, there's one big thing Jackie can't square when she considers the possibility that Feyther got away with murder.
I do have, a concern about the crime scene. I really do have a concern about that because...
What kind of concern?
Well, if Dancy did it and murdered him, how did he bolt the door? How did he get out? How did he leave him in there?
How did he bolt the door? How did he get out? What she's pointing out is that the police find Morris dead in the bathroom with the door broken open after it had been locked from the inside.
The problem with it is to work out how Tribe ended up on the lavatory floor and it's locked from the inside.
So if you were to believe that Feyther killed Morris, the question is, how does he get out of the locked bathroom in order to then knock the door down?
It is a quote-unquote locked door mystery.
Which, Hugh informed me, makes it part of a long tradition of murder mysteries. What's a locked door mystery?
It's when somebody dies inside a locked room.
Is that a thing?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the famous Sherlock Holmes one in which when it turns out that somebody managed to introduce a venomous snake through the light. But yeah, it's a thing.
And if you can't figure out a way that Feyther could have gotten out, then you can't really make a case that Feyther was in the room when Morris died. So, it can't have been Feyther.
So that supports the murder-suicide theory.
Next time on Ghost Story, we dive headfirst into the locked door mystery, in what's perhaps the strangest part of the police file of all.
It's insane.
It's almost like he's presenting it like a magician, right? But how did I get out of the door?
Follow Ghost Story on the Wondery app, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at wondery.com/survey. Ghost Story is a production of Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios. It's hosted by me, Tristan Redman. Our lead producer is Annie Brown. Our senior producers are Chloe Prasinos and Jess Hackle. Our producers are Zandra Ellen and Emerald O'Brien, and our associate producer is Natalie Peart. Joel Lovell is our editor, with fact-checking by Maximo Anderson. Theme song and music by Daryl Griffith, supplied by APM Music, with mixing and original music by Hannis Brown. Pineapple's head of sound and engineering is Raj Makija, with assistant engineers Sharon Badales and Jade Brooks. The senior audio engineer for Ghost Story is Davey Sumner. Jess Hackle was our senior producer of development. Our artwork was designed by Brian Kluge. Legal services for Pineapple Street by Rachel Strom and Sam Kate Gumpert from Davis Wright Tremaine, Crystal Tupia at Odyssey, and David Hurst from 5RB. Our senior producer for Wondery is Michelle Martin, with producers Brian Taylor White and Grant Rutter. Rachel Sibley is the managing producer for Wondery, and Sarah Mathis is the coordinating producer. Our executive producers at Pineapple Street are Maddie Sprung-Kaiser, Max Linsky, and Jenna Weiss-Berman. Our executive producers for Wondery are Morgan Jones, Rich Knight, Marshall Louis, and Jessica Radburn. Special thanks to Nick Kostov, Soho Radio, Richmond Local Studies Library, Alison Vermeulen, and Barney Lee. This episode contains public sector information licensed under the Open Government License version 3.0.